Mike Hamilton and Fred Langston. Today we're going to talk about lowering ransomware risk. Have a discussion here about it. Obviously, hot topic, important topic. But I have to say before we get started, and it looks like people are still coming to the room, the number's ticking up there. Man, I don't know how many folks here are in the Pacific Northwest, but it is just a beautiful day and it was supposed to rain. So right after this, I'm going to take my coffee outside.
It's not the same where I'm at, Jake, just to let you know.
It's what? It's not what?
It's overcast where I'm at.
So. Oh, is it? Well, shoot. All right. Well, right in my neighborhood, it's wonderfully sunny and it has not been all week. So there.
So we have subdued light in Bremerton. My eyes don't take sunlight anymore because of this.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't been to our events before, we try to keep it light while also being serious. And so, that's how it go. Over on the right there, you can see there is a chat. Please go ahead and chat during this and ask us questions. Steve says it's rainy, even stormy in the south. Well, it's probably warmer rain than we get here, though. Donna's cloudy on the east side. That's the east side of Washington.
East side, you're all the east side to me.
Mike's in Bremerton. So, yes, the entire United States is the east side to him.
That's right.
Okay, it's 12:02. Let's get started here. So, Mike, next slide. So, joining me today for this are Mike Hamilton, former CISO of the City of Seattle, co-founder of CI Security, founded with Fred Langston, who's our EVP of Professional Services. Fred steeped in healthcare background. Mike obviously steeped in municipalities and local government as background. Both of them have done consulting and worked with dozens of industries. I'm just the pretty face, which you can tell from my picture there. My name is Jake Milstein. I'm the CMO. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about ransomware risk. We're going to talk about how to mitigate it. We're going to talk about the things that even pros sometimes forget to do. And as we've helped organizations respond over the last year, we've seen some patterns. So we're going to do a little presentation here. It'll be about 10 minutes, and then we're going to do Q&A. As we go, put your questions in the chat. And then, of course, stay to the very end. We have a survey, a chance to give something back to a food bank. And also we'd love your feedback. We've been doing these events more and more as the pandemic has gone, and we love everybody's feedback as we do it. Mike, all yours, sir.
All right. So let's talk about ransomware risk. And I know everybody has been talking about ransomware nonstop for a long time. There's a reason for that. This is the scourge of our time. And as Jake said, the phone is ringing off the hook here for incident response. And what we are finding is that in a lot of cases, the organizations that have been hit with this extortion attempt were not as prepared as they could be. So we're going to talk about that from a variety of perspectives, but we're going to focus it around risk. So the conversation that happens around IT security, cybersecurity, whatever you want to call it, has really changed in the last, couple of years, 18 months, something like that. And now the business is really interested and engaged. But the language that we need to use is not scary Russians and cyber buffer overflow stuff. It's really got to be about protecting the operational continuity of the company, the organization, and managing what we expect as in terms of losses. So let's make this real. So there is the generalized expression for risk. Risk is the product of two things: the likelihood that some threat comes true, right? The probability that some threat is going to be realized, multiplied by its impact. So this is the way the conversation occurs now. It's really about, preserving funds for the organization. And the way that you address both sides of this. So the likelihood of a bad outcome, and we can call bad outcomes records disclosure, theft and extortion, right? Extortion, ransomware, and just disruption for the sake of disruption. So lowering the likelihood of one of those outcomes is done by the application of preventive controls. And we know what they are: antivirus, firewalls, intrusion prevention, URL filtering, email security, all that stuff. It's all intended to make these bad outcomes not happen. And they fail because actors are very determined, because we rely on people's decision-making capabilities, which are lame in some cases. So the point is, we have done a lot to buy down the likelihood of these bad outcomes. And what you're left with after you've exhausted all of the things that you can do to make it so unlikely that you get smacked, then you work with the impact term. And the way that you work with that impact term is your detection and response. So when something lands on your network, it doesn't just go bam, and lock you up. It's going to look around. And you have the opportunity to see that and to put out that little fire before the house really catches. And that's the way that you reduce the impact, right? If you get a piece of malware on a computer and it starts looking around and you go, we see you, and then smash it, that's a tree falling in the forest. If all of a sudden everybody's screen locks up and you're getting the the ransom demand, or the FBI calls because all your records are for sale online, that's the outcome you don't want. That's the impact you don't want. And you have a lot of control over which one of those is going to be yours. Okay, so this is not going to go away. If as a capitalist country, we should be marveling at the success of these perpetrators. It pays really well. The bar has been lowered so far that just about anybody can get into this business. And that's a trend that's not going to go away. It's extremely unlikely that anyone will be caught here. 99.9% of these perpetrators just go scot-free, and they're just all rich. And when I say, this is a bad problem, it's accepted that $600 billion a year is being lost from the United States from things like this. The Pentagon budget is $700 billion a year. And that comparison should really drive home the magnitude of this problem, and it's growing. So just from 2020, 25% pay the extortion demand. That's a pretty good fraction. Small organizations are going to get hit for about $6,000. The average, not demand, the average payout now is over $300,000 for large organizations. And you've probably read that right now Acer Computer is trying to put their network back together, and they have a $50 million extortion demand. And interestingly, the gang that did this, the Revel gang, they said, hey, if you pay us by Wednesday, we'll give you a 20% discount. So, I mean, these are businesses. They negotiate. They're projecting somebody's going to get hit with ransomware every 11 seconds in 2021. That's a little bit of a far-fetched prediction, but it's going to be frequent. And when I say ransomware kits cost as little as $50 on the dark web, there's one right there for $39. I mean, you can go out, and if you want to operate your own kit, you can do that for next to nothing. And they're so easy to use. You don't really need the kind of skills that we used to have back in the day, or the real experienced, red teamers, the penetration testers have today. Nobody needs those skills. They've packaged this to make it so easy. And now, problematically, on the other end of the skill spectrum, nation states are getting into this. And North Korea in particular is widely considered to be the biggest bank robber in the world because this is the way they do it. So all that is troubling, but the message there is you can expect this to persist, okay? And the way that you can think of it is, this is going to happen to my organization, okay? You are secure until your ticket is punched. And that's true today. That is true. Now, the trends here that we're watching, one of them is this as a service model. And you can see I pulled a couple of, dark web screenshots here. You need no skills at all anymore. You can just hire somebody. In some cases, you can point at the targets you want and then just collect money and split it with the real operator. So ransomware as a service is troubling. It is increasing, and I doubt that there's anything that we can do to make this go away short of, vaporizing the dark web, I guess. Manufacturing is really in the sights right now. And the reason should be clear. Manufacturing is a very business is very intensive in terms of its continuity of operations being the success to revenue generation. So anytime you can disrupt a manufacturing line, especially if it's robotic manufacturing, because that's completely dependent on IT, all of a sudden a company is losing lots of money every minute. So manufacturing, watch out. This is an interesting development too. Insurance companies are being targeted not to hit them with ransomware and extort them. They are being compromised so that these actors can get the client list and know who has cyber insurance, because the insurance company is likely to pay. There's a calculation there. How much is it going to cost to put this company back together from scratch versus what it's going to cost to pay the ransom? And it's the business model of the insurance company to get out as cheaply as possible. And so if that ransom is calculated to be exactly below the threshold, they're going to get paid. So they are going through, they're finding all of their customer base, they're extorting them, and then when they've exhausted the victim list, then they do it to the insurance company. That's a new trend, and that's troubling. Schools, now the #1 target. I think it's obvious why too. The more critical you are, the less you can survive downtime, the more likely you are going to be to pay. And right now, schools are in everybody's sights because everybody wants their kids to go back to school. It's online learning for the most part, dependent on IT. Ransom demands are going up. I said, the average payout now is over $300,000. Distributed denial of service is being used as an extortion tool. Pay us and we will make the pain stop, rather than encrypting your whole network. Double extortion, when records are stolen and they say, well, if you're not going to pay us the ransom, we're going to make all this stuff public. That has been pretty effective. And then a very troubling trend that's, I can't verify this is, I don't think anybody can verify this, but empirically, ransomware operators are coming in after a nation state event, right? After like an espionage event. And the nation state, establishes the beachhead out there. And then later on, the ransomware operators come in and take advantage of that access. And then it becomes a criminal operation. It's no longer espionage. All those are trends that are troubling and not going to go away. Okay, so some real frank talk about this. Okay, so the prevention. Listen, you're doing all kinds of things to lower the likelihood of these outcomes. Records disclosure, theft and extortion, disruption for the sake of disruption. Okay, you're already doing all of that stuff. So, everybody wants to offer you, hey, here's the new magic product that will definitely stop ransomware and automate response, and none of that is true. You're doing these things. Okay, generally, how it starts, it's the same way, right? A user is going to give up credentials. Somebody's going to break into a website. User is going to click on a link. A third party can get compromised and used as a jumping off spot and exploit the trust relationship between two networks. You have controls in place for all of this stuff. I would be surprised if all organizations weren't doing this by now. Multi-factor authentication is something that needs to be rolling out as quickly as possible, to mitigate the credential abuse that's going on, all the password stealing from phishing and all of the, the credential stuffing from big databases of stolen passwords. So you got to train your users. Training users will generally asymptote at about 3 to 5% recidivism rate. Since it only takes one person to get in, well, that's kind of an incomplete solution. You don't want these bad attachments or bad links getting in. All of the email services have pretty good stuff in place, right? So my point is, you're already doing everything you can to prevent this, and it will fail. So some piece of malware is going to land on the network. And remember, when a piece of malware lands, It doesn't know, unless it's highly targeted, it doesn't know where it is. It doesn't know what it's supposed to do. And it's got to beacon back home and go, I'm here. What do you want me to do? That's reaching out to its command and control infrastructure. If you are watching your network as you should, you will see the signal of something reaching out to command and control structure that you've never seen before. And even those sites may be on a watch list. You should have some mechanism for being able to say, hey, here's this communication going on that looks sketchy. Let's check it out. All of these things happen when malware, like registry changes, additional binaries, or the actual payload comes down, right? And then after that, especially in the case of ransomware, remember, it's not just a single computer that they're going to encrypt. They're going to look for everything. They're going to look for really what's important to the operational continuity of your organization. They're going to look for your backups so that you can't restore from backup. All of this looking around your network, right? The network reconnaissance that's going on. And it could be, searching for open SMB shares. Newer endpoint agents see this aberrational behavior. So you should be having something in place that, in addition to just trying to keep the stuff out, also can see weird behavior, right? Things that have never happened before, anomalous behavior. And this is really hard to get right, and it's expensive. And so generally what happens is, okay, all right, now we're hosed. It's ransomware. All right. And here's where the frank talk comes in. You have done a whole bunch of things up to this point to try and minimize the likelihood that this is ever going to happen, and it still happens. And then we get called and we find out everybody else is flat-footed with their planning. Okay, this has to be the focus right now. So this brings up these two things that we want to unpack here. Number one, stop thinking we're going to prevent this. Okay, you are secure until your ticket is punched. And then get real serious about this resilience business, right? Federal government talks about resilience a lot. And, depending on what your definition for that is, I can tell you the simplest one to remember is you're going to take a punch and get back up. So we got to get serious about the kind of planning that really, really admits this is going to happen. And when it does, we're going to be ready, and we are going to restore ourselves to operations as quickly as possible. And we're going to minimize the financial impact to the company, the organization, the government, wherever you're working with. So that's the story. That's what we want to talk about. And let's go into the panel, part of the panel, shall we?
and hey, one of the questions John asked in the chat as you were going back when you were up in the risk equation was the basic balance of the consequences.
The basic balance of the consequences.
So I think, so there are different consequences that that can happen, right? You get hit with this, you get hit with that. This one's about ransomware.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, there's right. So a piece of malware can send spam. It can reach out and hit ad networks so that someone is getting paid for ad activity. It can steal records, right? Just to steal records, especially in the health sector, right? Health records are extremely valuable still. So it can do all of these things. The one that's the most insidious is this extortion bit, because frankly, it puts you out of business until you comply or until you rebuild.
And, Fred, I know you and your team have just been working 7 days a week responding to incidents. What changes have you seen in the last year in one, criminal activity, and two, how organizations are prepared to respond?
Yeah, well, pretty much since about July of this last year, everything went to multi-stage attacks where they're going to spend time exfiltrating data. It's one of the first things they're going to do because that's their ace in the hole if they aren't able to encrypt your stuff. They're going to do that extensive reconnaissance. They're really going to understand what's there. they're going to start watching for your backups. So they're going to look, they're going to do a number of things. If they can't figure it out from a system that they've compromised, they're going to watch the network, and they're going to look for backup like traffic going to some particular system.
It's easy to see too.
Yeah, and they're going to, it's easy to see, and they're going to go after that backup with everything they have. So, the things that we start seeing that, we said, boy, it would have been nice if those backups should be encrypted, so nobody can look on the network and go, hey, that's the backup stream going to that server. Instead of having a beacon pointing to attack me, to the ransomware gang, you're at least making it a little bit more difficult for them. And the other thing is, this is something we've been saying for a while, the 3-2-1 backup rule is now more relevant than ever. And that is, you need 3 copies of your backups. Has to be on at least 2 different types of media. And one of those copies needs to be air-gapped and off-site. Off-site, so if an earthquake hits, you don't have the building collapse on your only backup. But also off-site and air-gapped, so the bad guys cannot possibly get to that. And that probably more than anything, with the one thing that saves you in a ransomware attack is that air-gapped off-site backup copy is the one that you're probably going to have to rely on to come back.
Yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of different stories of how organizations have been saved from an impactful attack. You can't stop the attack. You can do all the things to minimize your risk of getting an attack. You're going to get hit. So then what it is, I know, we helped one of our customers. They had a malware toolkit that was on a third-party computer that got brought onto their network. Our security operations center identified it, helped them put a stop to it, and no ransomware took over the system. And obviously, Fred, you've seen organizations with great backups. How often should organizations back up? I mean, it's hard if they're disconnected from the system, right?
Well, so that usually is a weekly full backup that happens, and that's the one that ends up going off-site. Usually you've got nightly incrementals happening. That's the one that they're going to go after, right? And they're also going to go after your VM snapshots, and they're going to go after anything that's going to allow you to recover. So yeah, it's a bigger lift, certainly coming from a full backup from 4 days ago or whatever. It's much bigger, but it's certainly a much lower effort than, paying a ransom, trying to rebuild from scratch, right?
It's not just your backups, because another technique that we've seen and recommended to some organizations in terms of readiness is that backup domain controller, right? So, create a backup domain controller, sync it to your domain controller, and then unplug it so that it's ready to go. If you got to plug that thing back in to get everybody reconnected, snappity snap.
Yeah. We have a great example of that in one of our ransomware clients. The only way they were able to recover is because there was a old AD server that had been disconnected. It had come disconnected from the network. Everybody forgot it was there, and everything got ransomware. And somebody found that this old AD server had still existed and was running, and were able to recover from that. But as Mike says, make a backup of your domain controller and pull it offline so you can bring that back online quickly. If in fact, like this Exchange event where domain admin credentials were compromised, that's a perfect example where you're going to have to do that if you want any level of assurance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go back to these backups. The other thing, what was the word we used? Get cagey with your backups. Isn't that
get cagey? Yeah, get cagey with your backups. Yeah.
Yeah. If we get cagey with the backups and so it is easy to see the backup process is happening if you're on a network, right? Because there are these huge pulses of lots of data. And if you can stagger your backups so that you don't create that signal, they're going to be harder to see. So that would be another way to get cagey with it, right? Just like dribble your backups so that you never create this gigantic movement of traffic across the network that identifies, here's where they're going.
There's another thing we're seeing is everybody's kind of gotten the clue that, hey, I have to do some level of testing of my backups. So most people they'll restore one machine, or they'll restore some records or something as their test. Well, the real test in this day and age is, what will it take for me to restore my entire infrastructure from backup? Because that's what you're faced with, right? And if you don't have that answer and know what it will take to come completely from, backup, hopefully offsite things, rebuilding servers from the ground up, and then, putting the data back on, what is that going to take? And if you don't know that, you really don't have a handle on what your risk and impacts are. If you have a major ransomware event and you can't go to your management and say, this is clearly what will happen to us as impact wise, because this is what we can point to every other ransomware attack. This is what has happened.
Yeah,
right?
and I want to get to, and so Chris over here says solutions such as Microsoft's LAPS effective to minimize spread of ransomware in the enterprise, or just a pain for my desktop support team. I love it. Support team hates it.
Yeah.
Brad, what do you say?
Yeah, so LAPS is absolutely an essential tool. It's not going to help you probably with ransomware. What it is going to help you with is, the first thing a bad guy is going to do when he gets on a system is try to see if there is a local admin password, with the hope that it's the same across the entire enterprise. If it is, they own your network, because they basically have a local admin password to everything. So it's clearly a great and key control. Microsoft realized this was essential, and that's why it's available now. And we tell everybody to use that. But it's not going to help you probably, at least with ransomware spreading. It will help you if that's what they're using to pivot and look around the network with, which is, like we said, they're going to look around for a while before they actually execute the ransomware attack. That might be a vector that they would use. So shutting that off may, in fact, slow down or even inhibit their reconnaissance for the malware or for the ransomware attack.
And I'd say too, just in terms of Microsoft controls out of the box, Defender with the right kind of license, even if it misses the malware and the malware hits, right? Because that's just an antivirus agent, just like every other, and they miss. But the behavioral part of that, when it starts looking around the network, Microsoft will say, you're acting weird. We've never seen you do this before. And they will raise an alert. And so if you are right, this is what we do. We ingest these alerts. Then that identifies this as, somebody better investigate this. And it also gives you the opportunity to, quarantine it, But again, that's the prevention part of this. Let's pivot a little bit into why a company should not really call us when something like this happens, because it may invalidate their insurance policy.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's a mistake too.
Yeah.
Right? You've got to look and see exactly what the terms are in there, because I'm pretty sure it says, if this thing happens, call us first. And you may, it's a business decision whether or not you want to invoke your insurance, and you may want to do some calculations, and it may be the best thing to call another company to come in and do a cleanup so you don't have to deal with that insurance part of it. But just be real careful what you're doing, because bringing a third party in when an insurance company says, we're going to run the show, may invalidate your policy or may make it tougher, right, to get paid out for something like this.
So let's talk about insurance. I think that's a really, really important topic for folks. So people buy insurance. They think it'll cover everything. If anything bad happens, I'm going to get a payout. I'm going to have my deductible, but it's not going to be so bad. And everything will recover, and we won't lose any money in the business because I have insurance. True or false?
Well, it depends on what your policy says. And I will say this, just recently in the news, it's projected that cyber insurance is going to go up 50% this year. And it's clear why. Insurance companies are being pummeled. When we have one of these global events that, like the one that's going on now, or the one that has been going on for weeks, and there are a lot of victims, insurance companies never really calculated, there's no such thing as a 200-year-old actuarial table for, cyber events. So, they're a bit finger in the wind on this thing, and they found out, they're carrying more risk than they want to as well. And, so be sure and go through that policy and see not only what it says in terms of the sequence of events that has to occur if you actually are being extorted, but also what it's going to pay for. Because again, that calculation, do we want to call the insurance company or not, is going to depend on that.
There's another component too, and most people never ask their insurance company about this, but they'll usually provide you with a breach coach. They may have in their policy, you're going to use our legal for the breach notification. They may say you will use our forensic investigator. They may have a whole number of things that they require to use. So be fully aware of what their requirements are if you make a claim or ask for help in ransomware. And again, if you have cyber insurance, before you call anyone, call them. Okay, because they're going to guide you. If you want to get paid, you may have to follow their steps, and you may have to retain certain types of evidence to prove that this actually happened. And if you go in and like a bull in a china shop and start shutting down machines and start rebuilding right away, which may not be a bad solution, but you're probably shutting the door on collecting on a ransomware policy.
You're destroying evidence is what you're doing.
You're making it possible for the insurance company to say, should we pay on this or did they just rebuild?
Yeah.
And understand too, when you rebuild, a lot of people the reason they got popped is because they have old software on old systems. And when they come in with the new stuff, it's 5 years newer and it's triple the price. And the insurance company says, okay, we're giving you the prorated cost of what it was to replace that old crummy stuff that's, not worth much anymore. And you're going to pick up the difference of all this. I've upgraded to now to, the latest Windows or the latest whatever it may be, right? So there's a lot of calculus that needs to go into this, which can lead to a lot of people, what they're doing is, I may have cyber insurance, but if I know what it's going to take for me to burn it all down and rebuild, let's go start yanking cables. If we see ransomware starting, isolating systems, don't care if we bring down everything. We want to bring down everything, and we're going to try to come back as fast as possible because some calculus says it may be cheaper to do that than investigate, go through all the things that you go through for the slow step, trying to figure out, well, is it worse? How bad is it? Should we go farther? How many systems do we need to rebuild? There's some people that have done this and said it's cheaper just to assume the worst, start over and rebuild. Then we have complete assurance that what we've done has eradicated the threat.
And frankly, I mean, you're making a really good point there, Fred. That's a cost that I think everyone needs to capture. What is the worst case scenario that we would have to rebuild all of this stuff, assuming that your backups are good or not? And so that what that number is, and you can make that determination, from a business perspective, a business decision. Do we involve the insurance company? Are we going to just build this back? Because once you call the insurance company, it's their decision to make. And you may not be happy with that decision. And, again, just in terms of the things that they'll pay for, I mean, they're going to pay for experts. They will designate the experts in most cases. They'll pay for the cost of legal support so that you can understand, all of the, breach reports you may have to be filing, the fact that there may be fines coming. So it will pay for the legal support, but it won't pay for the cost of all that compliance and the fines. Okay. It generally pays for public relations costs. It will pay for data restoration, and notably, it will pay the ransom. And then there's a whole bunch of there's a giant list of things it won't cover. So that's what you really need to be aware of.
And look, as the branding, marketing, PR guy, I have to say it also doesn't pay your reputational damage. Depending on what business you're in, reputational damage could be a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking actually to an insurance guy, and they said, oh yeah, we pay reputational damage. And I was like, well, like how much? And he's like, oh, it maxes out at it. He said, it's basically a $25,000 payout. Like, oh, my guess is that the reputational damage costs more. I saw one where the IT damage to a system was, and the fix and everything, was about $200,000, and they estimated the reputational damage based on the stock price drop and everything to be $6 to $7 million. And I think, and that was not even Target or Home Depot. So I am curious, though, for folks who are in the audience here, I'm curious what industries you're in. As we talk about reputational damage, as we talk about the criminals going after, put in the chat what industries you're in, whether you're state and local government, your healthcare, manufacturing. I'm curious. Also, from the audience here, John brings up the Microsoft Exchange. We used to call it the Hafnium, but it got bigger than that. He said, why are still multi numbers of Exchange servers waiting to be compromised? With such a clear message. And Eric says laziness or fear of breaking Exchange. I mean, this is a bit, Fred, you and I have been talking a ton about this. Why?
Well, there's a number of things. Anybody that hasn't addressed it by now is probably not watching the news. I would say it's hard to miss that. But what they have found is some significant percentage of people that have patched and gone and looked are still in fact infected, which is what we've unfortunately been telling people, that it's unless you do enough investigation to give yourself some level of assurance that they have not expanded their influence and moved into other systems, created other backdoors. Well, the fear is that, and it's seemingly starting to come true, that most of these people that think they're patched, in fact, have been compromised, and the bad guys are sitting there waiting for their moment. So, yeah.
Well, the statistic that I read, and we talked about this morning. I forget the name of the company, Unit 42, which is weird. They have done, one of these global surveys and found exposed Exchange servers. They say tens of thousands of them, and they say 50% of them are unpatched.
Yeah.
So, to answer, John's question, I think they just they have small IT teams, and the business is going along doing what it's doing and is ignorant of the fact that they own something that, can be or has been compromised right now. I think it's just they're not getting the information. While I'm on the subject, I will tell you what industry John is in. John was the guy that trained Fred and I in security 20 years ago. So, because he's not going to say that, but I'll say that.
And nothing's changed. So, but it looks like we have software, port, local government, higher ed, healthcare, other. Yeah, I mean, so we have a lot of folks here. So when we talked about the Exchange, the Exchange servers, tell a quick story here. We spent an hour talking about just that Exchange compromise. And one of the things that came up there was a lot of IT managers, CIOs, sort of concerned that, my boss, my board, doesn't, folks in my org don't understand that this couldn't have been prevented. That this was a 0 day. And so we sort of came up with the idea in the middle of the panel, to folks want an executive briefing that we delivered in Word document so that people could change it for their own, and I thought we'd get like 3 or 4 people who wanted it. 75 people emailed me and said, hey, can you send that to me? I'm curious from folks in the audience, do you want something like that for ransomware as well? With sort of the punch in the face, like there are things you do to prevent it, but you can't, you can't completely prevent it. There's no 100%. So it looks like people are saying, yes, they want it. Okay. So, we'll create that. I have to say the other story I want to tell is we've been doing a series of these, ransomware webinars. One was a virtual tabletop. We've done a bunch of others. In the middle of the virtual tabletop, somebody said, hey, CI, you do a bunch of things, what do you all do about ransomware? And so one of the, and so we started asking people in the survey, and you'll see it at the end of this, when you take the survey, we started asking people if there was a limit your risk of ransomware group of services, what would be in it? And 90% of people said a risk assessment, an annual risk assessment, or, risk assessment. 70% of people said security awareness training, which we've been doing for free. 50% of people said continuous vulnerability scanning. 40% of people said, I'd really love either they said endpoint detection response or managed detection response, especially for on-premises networks, and phishing monitoring with O365. And then interestingly, in sort of the 10 to 30%, people brought up, help me come up with an IR playbook, and help me with tabletop exercises. Instead of doing it myself, I want somebody to come in from the outside. I got a really passionate note. I see Christine putting in the tabletop was great. That's awesome. Somebody asking us, hey, can you come do that for my org? Like I do it, but it's nice to have somebody come from the outside. And so one of the things we did create, and forgive me, because remember, I'm the marketing guy, so forgive me for the moment here, but, we did create this, and I'd love people's feedback on it, of, a group of ransomware services. And, we put them together, and we've gotten some pretty good feedback on this, but, the goal is to be prepared to identify potential attacks and to resolve infections quickly. And Fred, you all have been doing these things for organizations for a long time, just not under this banner, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a lot of these things are foundational things that we do for people, but the concept here is, trying to take a look at the ransomware risk holistically and, putting these services together to directly address that risk. Of course, it addresses, dozens of other risks as well. But the focus, if we were to put something together like this, is to directly address the biggest risk right now, which is ransomware. So it's just a synthesis of the things that we do all the time, put together in that context.
And in fact, we got some feedback recently that we needed to add, a service like FishMe or something like that into it as well, so that it gets the beginning, it gets the end, it gets everything, right?
Yep.
All right, so that's it for my. I promised the guys I would only put the selling slide up once, but there you go.
Yeah, I wanted to answer. I think Robert Nolan had an interesting comment about the Mondelez lawsuit against the insurance giants, and this is
Zurich.
Noting. This was after, I think, not Petya, I believe it was, or Wannacry. I can't remember which one.
I think it was.
Yeah.
Not.
But what the case made there was, and why the insurance companies may win, is they said our policies specifically exclude acts of war.
Mm-hmm.
And they determined, because that was Russia attacking Ukraine, which then escaped Ukraine and took over the whole world, that that was an act of war. It was an act of cyber war, one nation against another, and therefore it's excluded and they're not going to pay. That could be an interesting outcome of the fact that Russia is thought to be behind, the SolarWinds attacks, and that China is thought to be behind the exchange hacks. We don't know, right? When people start putting some of these massive claims in, and I have read that there's more than one small cyber insurer that's going to go out of business from this. Mm-hmm. This is going to end up in court, okay? And this quite possibly could be another avenue or another venue in which they try to test that legal theory.
Yeah. The other thing too is the insurance companies, because they're the ones with the dog in the fight. And so there's this long-standing discussion: should security be driven by regulation or market forces? And I believe that the way that this is ultimate, and this is not my idea, I'm parroting somebody I heard at a Gartner conference. Ultimately, the insurance companies are going to be ones setting security requirements. And if you're going to be insured, you're going to have to meet their standard. So the other thing that happens is the insurance company will come in and say, well, your security practices do not match your own policies, or don't match your public statements, or are, they're just completely inadequate. You clearly did not take this seriously. Then we get into places like executive negligence, shareholders being really irritated about stock value drop, and class action suits, and then it gets really ugly. So, making sure that anything you say about we, are concerned with our customers' privacy and the security of the data that we hold, and if the insurance company comes in with their Q-tips and toothpicks and finds out that's not true, that's another reason for them not to honor the claim.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually we even heard that from somebody that having all of the logs actually proved their case when they were having trouble with
Hmm.
insurance.
Absolutely.
You need logs. You need logs. You need to be logging. You need to be aggregating your logs, and you need to be preserving your logs.
Which brings up something, a great point, that most people, what we found in a year of continuous incident response, I don't think we've come across a single entity that has their logging up to the level where we could do a good job doing forensics.
Yeah.
I mean, out of the box is not going to cut it with Microsoft. Frankly, in Linux, probably it's set to, the most basic level because it's all about saving disk space. I mean, you've got to tune your systems and make sure you're capturing data that's going to allow us to do a decent investigation, because our alternative is to tell you, you know what? We just can't tell and we can't be sure. So burn it down and start over. Okay. And frankly, I'm tired of making that recommendation, when, a few small changes could, go a long way to not having to ever make that recommendation. I also wanted to say, about ransomware is the ransomware gangs are getting smarter about what they're attacking. If you think it's, hey, my Windows infrastructure is what's at risk here, they've got a whole set of ICS, industrial control systems, to go after manufacturing, to go after smart cities, to go after anybody running, process equipment, industrial control systems. There are whole families of ransomware to take over those.
And they're going after manufacturing.
And they're going to be going after like water systems and things that we can't be down, or people are going to die. That's what they're looking at, and they know those people have to pay. And if I'm a small community water system, I don't have money to pay $1 million to get my water system back online. What do I do? So there's these potentially catastrophic outcomes for some of the people that may not think that they're a target, or that the systems they have are immune. They're not, right? And that's the sad fact of the world.
Well, let's pull back from the how scary this is, and right, because the point that I think we're trying to make here is, right, admit this is going to happen. Your preparation should be preparing for this to happen. And one of the things I'm reasonably certain that most organizations, whether they're regulated or not, have got some kind of business continuity plan, which means it's what it's going to cost per minute for you to be out of business, and B, you understand what your recovery time objective and your recovery point objectives are for this restoration. I'd for sure dust that stuff off and practice it. Mm-hmm. Make sure that you can actually meet your RTO and your RPO.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely practice it. I mean, it is 100%. So Fred said something there, and I think this is important because, hey, we've added something, which is, we said that there were two things that folks need to do better, but based on what Fred just said, there are three things. So, unwrap your head from the "we will prevent this," get serious about planning. And number three, make sure your logs are better.
Yeah, make sure your logs are better.
But I mean, that's probably part of number two. But, Fred, you were so fervent about that I think that's an important thing here. There is one other thing that I want Fred to say, because he's been on this for a couple of weeks now. It's an important Fred patching. Patching has changed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, we think there's a philosophical change in patching, in that if there is something that's a critical vulnerability that comes out and that asset has an exposure, like it's on the internet where a bad guy can get to it, that's, we're trying to come up with a term that's an incipient incident. It's going to happen, right? It's on its way. The fuse is lit. We just don't know exactly how many hours, minutes, maybe days before that happens. So instead of sticking with our 30-day patch cycle, which used to be fine to get ahead of this, we need to call an incident. We need to say, hey, this is an emergency. We need to do this at absolutely as fast as possible. And we need to, go through the proper procedure, which is test, because, we don't want the cure to be worse than the disease. by bringing everything down, and then roll out the patch as fast as possible. So I think there should be a new playbook in incident response plans, and that is critical severity patch on an exposed system. We need to call a team together and work on it right now.
Yeah.
Drop what you're doing. Get after
it. So I also wanted to make sure, since it looks like some folks are leaving, that people have our email addresses. Mine is in the chat, but of course, Mike Hamilton, it's either michael.hamilton@ci.security or mkh@ci.security, and Fred is fred.langston@ci.security. Most of us are first name, last name. Mike and I have vanity email addresses. I like to joke that mine is the vanity one because I'm the vain one, but I guess he is too. So there you go. All right. So guys, we've talked about, the things that folks miss. We've talked about what needs to happen. We've talked about the change in patching priorities, and we're going to work on that executive briefing because we want people here to be able to share things throughout their organizations about what the real danger here is and what needs to be done. So, how do you talk to people who are not IT people about this? How do you, if I'm a CFO, I think, hey, if I just hire the right people, and I spend enough money on it, ransomware becomes not a problem. In this circle, we know that's not true. So how do you have that conversation?
Well, I mean, you make that a business conversation. And you talk about the impact of records disclosure, theft, extortion, and you use the numbers that are currently out there, right? So the average payout is $300,000, okay? And then all of a sudden, the talk about money will put you on the business radar, and you can start to have the conversation about what constitutes a reasonable investment to buy down that risk. And frankly, investments ought to be for making sure that you can catch the signal of something in your network after all the prevention that you've put in place fails. So really, it is about logging and aggregating your logs and being able to evaluate those and having your logs alert, right? Events in your network alert so that somebody will investigate. That's a tough hill to climb. That's tough to put together for most organizations, mainly because the people that review logs and investigate events are in short supply, and we're going to tell you, Amazon's waving around gigantic bags of cash, and so that's where they go. But that's the toughest part of doing it, but that turns out to be the most important part. You can reliably say to the business, listen, we're doing everything we can, but the days of keeping the bad guys out of the network are long gone. Ask Acer. Right? I'm sure they put plenty of money into security. So, if they can, take them out, we don't stand a chance. So let's have this real conversation about what it's going to do to put us back together when this happens and be prepped for this.
I think it's hard to do, but if you can find a way to connect them with colleagues at other companies, other organizations, other agencies that have gone through this, that conversation will change their mind, because they will hear it from somebody that's a peer. They've seen what they've gone through. It's a horror show. And that's when that's when they're going to turn around and come to you and say, we need to fix this problem, when they hear it from their peer group. So if you can connect them somehow with, another city that had the same thing, another company that's, in your peer group, if you will, that's been through this,
send them the news blast every day because it's full of that stuff.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with that, Mike for 12 years now has sent out an email every morning with all the cybersecurity news he finds every day. And when you take the survey, you will be able to sign up for that if you like, if you're not already in it. I'll put the link to the survey in the chat here while we answer John's question.
Yeah, I want to answer that.
Yeah, Mike, why don't you read it and answer it while I get the survey here?
Okay, so the question is basically, how do you bridge the IT/OT divide when we're talking about industrial control systems, SCADA, right? Whatever you want, OT, IoT. In general, when we're talking about things like water utilities, energy generation, dam operations, the people that work in operational technology in those SCADA systems, their life is, programmable logic controllers, the human machine interface, the historian, things that IT people just don't know about and talk about. On the other hand, the people that do operate that stuff, it's all about continuity of operations. Do not let things fail. Got to keep operating. And so the concepts of things like patching and upgrading firmware on programmable logic controllers is just a foreign concept to them. And so I have addressed this in a number of larger cities where they have public utilities. And the idea was we want to get consistent application of policy on both sides of the IT OT divide. And it's got to start with a conversation, a memorandum of understanding, making sure that, we're here to help. We're not getting in your business. We understand, you're making drinking water for people and we don't want to disturb that. But, the bad guys are coming for you. So let's have that conversation. So, a memorandum of understanding and even providing some resources from IT to be at the disposal of the folks in OT just to prevent things like, the Netgear router under the desk that's running, to stuff like gates that go up and down, right? Because we've seen all kinds of things like that. That's how you prevent that.
Yeah. I'd also, most people have vendors somewhere in the middle of their management of their OT. So if you're not involving your vendors in this process and not putting in their contract that they're responsible for, a number of security things like applying critical security patches and upgrading firmware, which is a real problem for a lot of systems, you need to make sure that they're fully on board, because in a lot of cases, that's really who's running the OT. You've got people using the OT on the company or agency side, but the people actually managing it a lot of times are vendors.
Yeah, that's true.
Yep. All right, guys, we are just about out of time. Folks, please remember to take the survey. Number one, we want your opinions. People have told us they like our events, so we keep doing them. So if you're like, man, this really stank, then tell us that in the survey. But mostly, we're at 9.4 out of 10. We want to stay there. Number two is, at the end, you do have a chance where you can either get your own gift card or donate it to charity. And the charity is always a food bank because, hey, we're in a pandemic and that's what folks need. Yeah. And so please fill out the survey for that. And number three is you can, in the survey, say you want to talk to Fred or Mike, or you can just email us and we'll help you out. I also see how many people want that executive briefing. So Mike and I will work on that and we'll put it in one of the follow-up emails here, and we'll send it in a Word document again, since that's
because you're going to want to season things to taste, right? You don't want to can thing from a company and hand it to your executives, right?
Even if it's a company as good as ours, right? Yeah, sure. Yeah. So final thoughts, Fred, 30 seconds, Mike, 30 seconds. Fred, what do you got?
It's all about being able to recover, and that usually means making sure you know what it costs to fully come back, everything from backup. You practiced it, you're protecting those backups. That's what it's about, I think, if you want to get back on your feet.
Mike, 30 seconds.
I'm only going to take 10 like Fred did. I think the main message is that because this is such a successful business, and because the bar has been lowered for anybody to get into it, and because it is so unlikely that anybody's going to get caught, I think we have only seen the tip of the iceberg of how bad of a problem this is going to be. And I think eventually governments are going to intervene. And, Russia, if you can't control your organized crime people, something really bad is going to happen. And it's got to come to that before this stops, because this will not stop. So prepare for it to happen to you.
Well, on that happy note, thank you, everybody. This is a really important topic. We have a bunch of other webinars coming up. For those of you who are in healthcare, we actually just announced today that the American Hospital Association went on a nationwide search and chose CI as the preferred vendor for MDR and risk assessments and a bunch of the other things we do. And so that's really exciting. And we're going to do a webinar with them. We're going to do one on local government, on how to budget for local government. That'll be in 3 weeks, I think, Mike. Mm-hmm. Mike's going to pull out the budget spreadsheet and That'll be fun.
We're going to do an exercise.
So anyway, look for those emails. Thank you very much. Have an awesome day. And it's now not sunny, so that's how it goes. But thank you, everybody.
I see
Bye-bye.
a bunch of people I know on the list there. So hi, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.